Good morning and welcome to the May DAC Monthly Webcast. I'm Jennifer Stafford, the Director in the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support. And we welcome you to the webcast, our second edition of home edition of our webcast. We are presenting from our different locations today, and we hope that you are home. We hope that you are safe. We hope that you are healthy as we are going through this national emergency and this crisis. We want to welcome you and hope that you, again, are safe and healthy at home. We have several topics to discuss today. With us presenting this morning is our own Kevin O'Hare. He's going to talk with us through some alternate assessment pieces. Pam Powers, as always, is taking your questions. So if you have questions, please email dacinfo@education.ky.gov. And Helen Jones is also here, our branch manager in the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support, and she is going to present to us. So as we look at the agenda today, we'll start out with a high-level overview of the Senate Bill 1, a piece of legislation that was passed this legislative session. We'll go into then the assessment targets for our alternate assessment. Kevin will present that piece. Then we'll take a look at an opportunity for you to be involved with the social studies field test. So that's coming up this fall, and we want to start the conversation about your involvement in that. We also have some results to share with you on the survey that we did on the field test that was included this past spring in February and March. And the quality of school climate and safety, we have some results of the survey that we completed. And then we have time for questions and answers. And then we want to finish out today with remembering a friend and colleague and someone that is so dear to us who passed this past week. So we want to remember him in the fond memories we have of him. So let's begin first with Senate Bill 158. Now, with this piece of legislation, we're going to discuss at a very high level the changes. This is an overview, will provide general information about the piece of legislation. However, it will not provide all the specific details that I know that you as district assessment coordinators will want to know. Many steps will need to be taken to fully implement this piece of legislation. And you know that any changes that we make to assessment and accountability must be approved by the U.S. Department of Education through our ESSA Consolidated State Plan. So we have to take many steps to fully implement this piece of legislation. So those details, those fine details that you want to know, unfortunately, we won't have all of those today, but we will be able to provide you an overview. So this piece of legislation, Senate Bill 158, was sponsored by Senator Given, and it incorporates changes to multiple statutes. So it's a bill that impacts multiple statutes. It makes changes that are significant to our statewide school accountability system. It makes changes to how we identify schools for our federal classifications of targeted support and improvement, additional targeted support and improvement, and then it has the comprehensive support and improvement definition as well. It makes changes to both state and local graduation requirements. We want to make sure that you understand those. It also changes charter training for local school board members. And finally, another piece we want to talk about is the definition of achievement gap and some of those expectations. So then if we look a little bit farther, it modifies, again, the components of the accountability system. It requires our state indicators, and we've had indicators for many years, but those indicators will be looked at through the lens of both status and change. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more in here in just in a few moments. It requires the school overall performance of status and change to be combined and displayed in an overall dashboard, similar to our school report card that we've used before. So we'll have some presentation and displays within our school report card on that. It also specifies the dates, and we'll look at those dates more closely. It states that 3 years of performance will be used when determining the lowest 5% of schools, and then clarifies that the superintendent, principal, or school district can appeal a performance judgment. So now let's unpack that just a little bit. So the performance with our schools are going to be a combination of both academic and school quality measures. And those are brought together into what we call indicators. And we've had indicators before, but this piece of legislation, it specifies that the indicators shall exclusively include, so exclusively, limited to these. First, student assessment results. Second, progress toward achieving English language proficiency by English language learners. The quality of school climate and safety, that's the survey that we were able to utilize this past spring. Also, graduation rate for high schools and post-secondary readiness for high schools. Now, when we look at those terms of exclusively, we'll also want to look closely into what that post-secondary readiness definition is within the statute or within that bill, because with that word exclusively, there may be pieces that we have used in the past that aren't particularly within the piece of legislation. So we'll have to look more closely at that to see if there are other pieces within the legislation that we have used in the past, but may not be able to use in the future. Now, moving on, the legislation puts these indicators, so the assessment results, the progress on English language proficiency, those quality school climate safety, high school graduation, and the post-secondary readiness, they put those 5 indicators into buckets. So let's think of them in terms of status, and the other bucket being change. So those 5 indicators, looking at those 5 indicators of status, and the status means the current year performance. That's kind of what we've done before. So that's not a lot different that we've had, because we've had status on schools' performance regularly. The big difference will be this change bucket. So taking each of those 5 indicators, looking first at status, and then the change is determined by using the difference between the performance on those indicators from one year to the next. So it'll take a couple of years to get this accountability into place, because to have change from one year to the next, you have to have a year and then the next year to be able to determine if there was change within those indicators. Now, moving on, the legislation states that beginning in the school year of 2020-2021, so this would be next school year, for all students and all student demographic groups, the school accountability would be based on status and change. Well, we would have to have status in 2021, but then we would have to have change beginning in the 2021-2022 school year. So next year, if we're able to have state assessments, and if there are no waivers because of the current situation that we're in, we'll have school accountability based on those 5 indicators within status for next year, 2020, 2021. Then the following year, if all things hold, then the following year in 2021, 2022, we would have a combined performance of status and change. So moving on, looking at this, continuing to look at the statute indicates or specifies that each indicator shall be rated from very low to very high for status. So for status, we'll look at each indicator, and similar to the indicators we had and reported for 2019 back in the fall, we have the ratings of very low to very high. So remember the school report card, we had colors within the school report card and those levels, starting with very low, low, medium, high, and very high. So that's very similar to what the statute or this bill indicates for that change, or excuse me, for the status piece of those 5 indicators. Now, the next year, 2021, 2022, we can add the change. And the statute specifically says that the change rating or that will range from increase significantly to decline significantly. So for each of those indicators, you could imagine that terms such as declined significantly, declined, maybe maintained or held steady, remain the same, increased, or significantly increased for each of those indicators in that change bucket. So that's a big difference than we've had in the past. So we'll, again, have to work through our ESSA Consolidated State Plan and get those pieces aligned and the details approved by the U.S. Department of Education. Now, the percentage, the percentile, and those different thresholds that will be used to identify the indicators of status from very low to very high, or the indicators within change from statistically decreased to statistically increased, will be set by both the Kentucky Department of Education and superintendents who sit on the local superintendent advisory board. So we call those LSAC. So the department will bring together group and bring together that LSAC and present to them, and we'll work collaboratively through the identifications of those ratings with LSAC. So the bill states that those performance cut points should be maintained and in place for 6 years. And that's a really a good goal to have. And we will have to look at, as the statutes or the bill states, that unless the existing cut scores are no longer meaningful or they do not contribute to a meaningful differentiation of schools, or something within the ESSA changes. So we will have to look at those for verification that those cut scores. But the goal would be that once those performance ratings are set, then they would stay in place for at least 6 years. Now, the statute goes on, or the bill goes on to state that beginning in the fall of 2022, that a dashboard system will be color coded. You can see some of that, what it would kind of look like on the last year's school report card, and that results are presented for each indicator, as well that overall performance of both the status and the change for every school and for all of the student demographic groups. So the term there, subgroups, is from the bill itself. We at KDE like to use the word student demographic group, so that's the term that we use, but the bill states something differently. But what we want you to know is that those results will be reported by district, school, and student demographic groups, and then aggregated together where all of the data is available. Now, looking on to the next slide, the bill also changes the KRS that specifically deals with our federal classifications of CSI, Comprehensive School and Improvement, TSI, Targeted Support and Improvement, as well as ATSI, Additional Targeted Support and Improvement. Now, you may recall this past reporting that our definition, when we were negotiating with the U.S. Department of Education, they didn't accept our previous definition for TSI. They thought that our definition of TSI more closely aligned with ATSI. So this past fall, we were able to report schools that were ATSI as well as CSI. Now, this bill, Senate Bill 158, rectifies that definition of TSI, and we believe that will be accepted by the U.S. Department of Education. Both department staff as well as staff from the Legislative Review Commission were working with the U.S. Department of Education, and we feel pretty confident that this definition meets their guidelines. Other pieces of the legislation talks about identification of a turnaround vendor and who can be on that turnaround vendor and so forth. So I want you to know that the piece of legislation does address goes more in depth with those guidelines and specifications. So moving forward, it also brings forth the next slide, please, Helen. It looks at different statutes and amends different statutes. The two here I want to highlight for you is that it prohibits high school graduation requirements from including post-secondary readiness measures in this and the assessments used for state testing. So both of these pieces are impacting our graduation. So looking at both of those statutes, it changes the requirements for students and prohibits those pieces used for transition readiness and state accountability to be used for graduation. Now, we do think this impacts our early graduation program. So we have been using our end of course assessments for early graduation, and we do think that this statute prohibits us from doing that. So that program will need to be reviewed as well. Other pieces in the bill continue on with impacting the training for our local school boards association. And it also talks about the differences in achievement gap. So there are specific pieces in that legislation that identifies what achievement gap means. And the achievement gap definition within the legislation is the difference between performance goals and actual performance on each of the tested areas by grade level in the state assessment program. Now, the way that this reads and the way that we are interpreting it is that the achievement gap would be reported, but not so much a part of the school accountability system. So that is a significant difference than we had this past year. So that is a significant amount of change. So again, this piece of legislation does vastly change the school state accountability system. It changes the identification of our federal classifications, as well as those school provisions of improvement, of turnaround, those state and local graduation requirements, and the achievement gap definition. So I'm not going to go into reading the specifications of the bill. There's a link there for you if you want to go into that and read more specifically about any of those topics. But I did want to provide you a high-level overview because we have been talking about this Senate Bill 158 that was going through the legislative session and then signed by the governor last month. So wanted to provide you those details at a high level. Now, again, I know that you all, because you all are district assessment coordinators and want those details, of implementations. But again, there's going to have to be many steps before that must be taken before we can implement the full system. So with that, let me turn now to Kevin O'Hare and ask him if he would talk about the alternate assessment targets. And as he is opening up his camera, I will say that we are working toward providing more additional information for you on the alternate assessment field test. This is one step closer to getting us to a field test for our alternate assessment students. As you recall, in the spring, we were successful in a field test for our regular population with reading and math, on-demand writing, and editing mechanics. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get in the field test for our alternate assessment students because of the current situation that we're in, and we're not providing those state assessments this spring, which was when the alternate assessment field test was scheduled. So we're working very diligently with our psychometricians on those next steps for our field test for our alternate assessment students. And we're looking at different ways. Just because we've done a field test one way here in Kentucky doesn't mean that there are not other ways. So we're doing some due diligence here and looking at other states and other programs that maybe do field testing a little bit differently. So we'll have more information on the field test soon, but as a first step, Kevin is going to present the alternate assessment targets. So Kevin?
Well, thanks, Jennifer. Thank you all for allowing me to have the opportunity to just share a little bit of information with you today about what's been going on with the Kentucky alternate assessment and some of the work that has we've been conducting over the past several months, and it's really ramped up over the last the few for sure. Before I get into the breakdown though of the actual development of the targets and that process, just to give you a really brief background of what led us to this part of the assessment development. The start of back in 2017 with the Senate Bill 1 and those revisions, required us to have a review based upon a rotation for our academic content standards, and that review was to occur once every 6 years and could result in the application or adoption of new content, academic content standards. So as you all are well aware, that process also has to occur for alternate assessment if it occurs for general education students. And so the moving forward of the work that was being done with Senate Bill 175 in 2019, there were a little bit of language change around the transition parts of things, but the academic content and those revisions stayed the same. And so with the adoption of the reading and writing and mathematics standards in I want to say of June of last year, 2019, and then social studies following closely thereafter in July, with those new standards being officially put into place, that kind of led us to the work with our alternate and the development of the work that is ongoing. So in September of 2019, or September of this past year, we had the opportunity to bring in elementary, middle, and high school content teachers as well as alternate assessment teachers from all across the state. We had a good group participate and were willing to participate, and they wanted to take part in the work that we were doing to develop the next steps for our alternate assessment. So basically what we done is we asked them to come in and prioritize or select their top 10, and then to give us that sense of what they felt from a general education and alternate assessment, alternate education participation part of it, what they felt jointly would be the highest priority or the standards that would receive the most focus. And so they did that for reading and writing and math, reading and math and social studies, excuse me. And then writing actually stayed the same. It actually stayed at 6 standards, but we did bump reading, math, and social studies up to 10 standards. And that was the flow of that was kind of a joint effort. It was the fact that give a lot more consistency in collaborative model classrooms where that teachers were collaborating with the content and building classroom instruction, and it also give a little more flexibility in the way that items were being written. When we had the 6 standards across the board, it really restricted any flexibility in the ability to write items. So that process occurred in September. And then, of course, if any of you have been aware with assessment development and prioritizing standards and things like that, that doesn't happen overnight. So the next 3 months, we spent getting everything together. And in December and January, KDE content consultants, along with consultants from the special education office here at the department, as well as folks within our office, we worked in collaboration with regional low incidence consultants and many of their content folks to develop what we now know as alternate assessment targets. And so our goal moving into this was we aren't permitted to develop a new subset without going through several different steps and scenarios for alternate assessment targets. Our charge is to utilize the same level of academic content standards that all other students use. We just have the ability to, for testing purposes, to reduce those a little in depth and breadth as long as we maintain alignment. And so in December and January, we brought teams together, and that's what our goal was. We actually went in and developed those alternate assessment targets. Now, I'm going to repeat this several times, and over the next probably 6 to 8 months, you're going to hear me say this, and you're going to say, man, I wish you would stop with that. But I want to continue to reiterate that we don't have new standards. We don't have alternate assessment standards. We have Kentucky academic standards, and some of those have alternate assessment targets, okay? So the targets are developed in a sense to represent what the test items could be developed around. So we have the ability to limit or reduce in depth and breadth some of the components within the Kentucky academic standard. Now, I will tell you that when we release these standards, and not all of them are going to have targets. And the reason for that is that some of them may already be reduced in depth and breadth to the point that if we start making or taking additional components of that standard away, it would then impact the alignment. And of course, when we start impacting alignment, then there's a whole issue with validity, and the list goes on and on. So when you see this work that comes out, you're going to see some of the standards that are going to say no limitations. All parts of the Kentucky academic standard are eligible to be included as an assessment item. So basically what that would mean is that all parts of that standard could be included whenever the assessment part of the development occurs. So moving on to the next part, we talk about just the process for the release of the targets and the standards. So tomorrow we are anticipating release of our reading and mathematics Kentucky academic standards and alternate assessment targets. So along with the release of those standards and targets, there'll also be a PowerPoint that will accompany those trainings, and you'll be able to go and actually kind of get a more detailed look at the targets development. We'll talk about additional release for, of course, reading and math coming out tomorrow, but then following up with that, we will have the content for writing and social studies coming out in June. There's also a look at just briefly talking about the instructional side of this. As you know, sometimes people feel that maybe getting the cart before the horse, and when we're talking about assessment, which is kind of what our focus is right now with these, is talking about the assessment part of it. But the reason for that was we have to be working on test item development now. We have to be working on, as Jennifer noted earlier, working with field test items and making sure that those work. They have to go through several steps with content bias reviews. We have to screen the items. They're picture based. We have to bring in illustrators to draw pictures to represent those items. So it's a very, very long process. And so we kind of had to jump up and put this work in the forefront. But I will tell you that our low incidence consultants, they are working very closely with our content folks here at the department and also within their regional settings to come up with professional development plans for the instruction, the breakdown of these. So they're going to utilize the same standards. They're going to, they will include the targets, but they're going to look at breaking down the standards, whether it be through I can statements, whether it be through additional resources. That also comes into play with a lot of the work that's going on with our special education officer at the department. And Tanya Sharp has been working closely to lead a lot of that work for specially designed instruction. So there's a lot of additional details that we're not going to release tomorrow, other than just the standards and the targets and kind of that part of it. But the instructional part of it is still ongoing. And I will tell you that I've worked very closely with these groups and the development of the work that they're doing. And I think you're going to really like the outcome of this once they have their plans in place. I do know that they're going to, try to reach out to teachers throughout the summer. I think their plans are to have maybe some broadcasting information, live webcast, to just get some questions. And I hope to participate in some of those as well to answer or address any questions that our teachers might have. But the goal and what the plan is tomorrow, May 15th. We're planning on at some point tomorrow afternoon releasing the via special alternate assessment email the reading and the mathematics standards that were selected, as well as any alternate assessment targets. Those documents that you'll receive, they'll actually be a little more in depth because it'll actually have information on there for math, for instance, where it talks about clarification. That clarification clarifies what that standard means. And so, that work has been done in line with our content experts here at the department. And I think you're going to like, as we progress throughout building additional resources for the upcoming work, you're going to really see some good information roll out. So that's kind of the direction that we're moving forward with right now. All right. Well, that is kind of just a general overview of what we've been doing with the alternate and the work we have ongoing. And as Jennifer noted, there's still a lot of work to do, but we hope to keep you all included and along for the ride. And just to note that hope everybody's staying safe, and we appreciate all you do. So Jennifer, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing with educators across the state, our low incidence consultants. That has been a tremendous lift across the state. We really appreciate our low incidence consultants in the co-ops. They have been a tremendous valuable partner in the development of the targets, and I can't say enough about the educators that were just so dedicated to this development and identifying the standards, and now then to take the next step into the target. So a lot of good work, a lot of heavy discussion and good discussion. So we appreciate very much all the work and effort that everyone is putting into that. Let's look now at our social studies field test. And we want to provide an opportunity for our schools and districts to participate. So looking at the fall, we have a tentative window scheduled for the social studies field test of September 14th through 18th. The social studies standards will be field tested at the grade level above where they will be operational. So the field test is tentatively scheduled for grades 6, 9, and 12. Now, when we get to operational in the spring, if everything holds, then in the spring, students at grades 5, 8, and 11 will take the operational assessment for school accountability. Now, we at the department understand that there is a lot of discussion about the opening of schools. Kevin Brown, our interim commissioner, and superintendents, they are working with the local health department. They're looking at guidance from the governor's office, and it is just uncertain right now of what the fall semester will look like. We really understand that, and as district assessment coordinators, many of you are assistant superintendents and wear multiple different hats. We want you to be focused on the instruction and safety of your students. At the same time, we want to provide an opportunity for our districts and schools to be a part of the social studies field test. So we have developed a questionnaire. It's very brief, and it really just says, do you have interest in being part of the social studies field test? This by no means locks you into, oh gosh, I have to be in school in September to do this, to be a part of this. We are just really trying to gauge the interest of our districts in being part of the social studies field test. So we're asking you by June 1st if you would complete the survey. And it basically asks you for some identifying information, your name, your email address, the district, and if you are in person and in session, if your students are back in session in September, would you like to participate in the social studies field test? So if you would please discuss that with your district leaders and your school leaders to see if they would like to participate in that. And again, that in no way locks you into being part of that if you're not in session. But we're, again, just trying to gauge whether or not we have a lot of interest in being part of that social studies field test. Now, I will note that we need a broad range of students. We need students across student demographic groups. We need students across race, ethnicities. We need students across special needs. The variety of special needs that students have, we need their representation. We also need a distribution of student performance. We need both high and low performing. So we need that representation across the state. If we don't get enough volunteers for that distribution to be met, we will call on some districts and ask them to participate. So if you would, please talk with your leaders and just gauge the interest of whether or not your district would like to participate in the social studies field test. Now, I will note also for you that this is a district decision. So if you have multiple high schools or multiple middle schools in your school system, that if you say yes as a school system, then you are volunteering all of the schools within that district. So we're not able to take some schools in your district and others not. So if you say yes, then we are expecting that all the schools in your district would participate. So please, if you would, complete this participation list, whether or not you would like to participate. So if you know right now that you don't want to participate, then please say no. So if you would, talk with your leaders across your district and gauge that level of participation. Helen, I want to now turn it over to you because we had a really good survey and questionnaire on the field test that we were able to get in February and early March. And we had a tremendous response rate. We are so excited because we had a lot of people respond, and we had a lot of people at the elementary level particularly, so in middle school level as well. So we want to share with you some of the results of that survey around the field test as well as the quality of school climate and safety survey.
Well, good morning, everyone. I had to check the time to make sure we were still in the morning. But as Jennifer said, we want to, first of all, thank you all so very much for your willingness to complete the survey. As you are aware, in late February and early March, the Kentucky Department of Education conducted an online field test of the items for the newly adopted Kentucky Academic Standards in preparation for the 2021 operational online assessment. During that time, we also conducted a assessment for our operational quality of school climate and safety survey. Well, the department felt that the field test itself was what did very well. So we were very pleased with the results. However, we needed to hear what you thought. So we wanted to hear your thoughts on the field test and what happened actually in the districts. So we sent out this survey to get your feedback. And again, we want to thank you so very much for taking the time to complete the survey. It really was a tremendous response for the survey. So let's take a look at some of the results from the survey. As you can see, we wanted to, first of all, to determine who was taking the survey, who participated in the survey, who participated in the work of the field test. It was important for us to understand, who was completing the survey. We had a tremendous, as Jennifer stated, response. We had well over 920 responses. This included our DACs, our VACs, our test administrators, proctors, and everyone. We had and others that participated in this survey. We recognized that when you start looking at the data, we noticed that when we added up the percentages, there were it added up sometimes to over 100%, or the numbers were well over the 920 responses. But what we recognize is that depending on the participants, they may actually wear many hats. And we know that in the districts, people have different positions. There are multiple positions that may be held by one person, and it may go across grade bands or grade levels. So we recognize that the data, for instance, when we looked at this, it was well over 100% in terms of the responses. So again, we understand that some people may have answered depending on the role that they were in. So they may have been a BAC that was also a test administrator. So we understand that happens in our school districts. As well as the next slide. So we wanted to know at the school level who was participating. So as Jennifer stated, at the elementary and middle school level, we had overwhelming participants at those grade levels. if we add up the percentages of those that participated, we had over 90% from the elementary and middle school levels that participated in this survey. And again, when we looked at the actual numbers and added up the responses, it was more than the 920. But we understand again that the way the structure of our schools are, we may have a K-8 system. So in a K-8 system, you may only have one back, or we may have a K-9 system, K-9 school. So in a K-9, that particular individual may actually hold mul- multiple roles across the grade band. So they are the back for the elementary, the middle, and the high. And they also may have been a test administrator. They also may have been a proctor. So some of the responses, when we add up the actual numbers, they actually exceeded the 922 responses, but we understand how that could have happened, because one person could have answered for multiple positions at the school level. And we want to thank you, because that is very important information for us to understand what's happening in our schools. The next slide actually discusses whether or not the students had an opportunity to use the practice test. And overwhelmingly, we had 87.6% that indicated that their students did have an opportunity to use the practice test and the tutorials. We did hear you when we said, several of you commented that they felt that this was rushed, though. And we realized that during the time between the time that you actually received access to the practice test and also our administration of the field test, that you didn't have enough time. So we did hear that in in the comments. The next slide actually is our quality of school climate and safety survey. And in this survey, we wanted to know if you felt like the questions were clear and understandable. And overall, as you can see, 69% thought that they were and or agreed that they were understandable. But then there were some comments that said that some of the students, especially our younger students, and I actually tried to capture at least a couple of the comments that talked about how our younger students struggle with some of the concrete ideas. For instance, one person stated that the example that they were used was when asked, "Do the teachers greet you in the hallway?" Well, some of our younger students say, "Well, we can't talk in the hallway." So we're going to look at how some of those questions may be worded so that it's a lot clearer and understandable for our younger students. This slide actually talks about whether or not our students' use of the tools that were provided within the survey, and the use of the tools and the experience that the students had in using the tools. Um, as you can see, 42% indicated that the tools were good. 24.5% responded that they were very good, and 19 thought that they were fair. This is another area in which some of the comments were that it felt like you just did not have enough time to have the students use the tools during a practice session prior to then having to actually administer the actual field test. So that's information that we will be taking into consideration going forward. In this particular slide, we wanted to start gauging what was happening with the technology. As I stated before, we at the department actually considered that everything went well. We were very pleased with the technology, and we thought everything functioned as we thought it would. But we needed to hear from you. And overall, I think what we said was that you really did not have any problems with the technology. However, there were some people that did experience some technology issues. And if you did you have to call Pearson, who is our vendor, for assistance? So there were some that actually had to actually make that phone call. And so let's look at the next slide. So if you did have to make the call to our vendor, the next question was whether or not did Pearson answer your questions in a timely manner? Were you able to get some resolution on the issues that you were having during that time? And so most people did not have any problems. But for those of you who did, we wanted to know were those problems resolved in a timely manner. And 5.6% of you answered no. And that, even though that's not a lot, is still important for us to understand what happened during that time period, because our goal is once we go operational, we need to ensure that everyone has their questions addressed. Some of the ones that talked about the issues of having problems, it really kind of stemmed around the grade band. I'm sorry, the whether or not there was capacity for having all of the computers online at one time. So those were some of the comments that we saw in this particular slide. This question focused on having to actually complete tasks um, that were in the PA Next system or PAN system. And overall, what we saw is that 21% thought it was very good, that they didn't have any issues, and some 36.4% thought that it was good, and 15.5% thought it was fair. Um, but this one, we realized that primarily it was only the administrators that had to actually complete the tasks that were set up in PAN. So there were not everyone may not have had to actually, the ones that actually completed the survey may not necessarily had to actually do anything in PAN. Now, even though the comments were for the survey itself was not difficult, or they didn't think that they had any issues in PAN, we did hear while we were out on during the February DAC trainings that there were some concerns that were taking place while the um, trying to, one of the big ones that we heard, recall, was that having to have students transferred into your school. So those were some of the concerns that you were having in PAN. And so those are things that Pearson has already heard, and we've already communicated that to them, and they're working on that. So overall, I just want to say we were very pleased, and we can't thank you enough for taking the time to actually complete the survey. This will really help us in our decisions as we go operational in our testing for the state. And we could not do this without you. So thank you so very much, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share what was going on in your in the school districts. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Helen. And again, I just want to iterate, thank you all for sharing the questionnaire and that survey. The overwhelming response was tremendous. The next steps that we will take for that survey is to share that with our vendors. Actually, we have already shared it with our vendors, and they are looking at the comments as well. So we take your input very seriously, and we really appreciate everyone taking the time to complete that. Let me pause at this point and ask Pam if we have any questions from DAC Info.
We've got a few questions come in. Thank you, Jennifer. The first two we're going to get to are from the Senate Bill 158. So these are for you, Jennifer. How will Senate Bill 158 impact schools who are currently identified ATSI?
So for this year, because of the state waiver, as part of the state waiver, what Kentucky had to do is assure the U.S. Department of Education that those schools that were identified for comprehensive or targeted support and improvement for this year, for the 1920 school year, they will maintain that identification in the 2021 school year. Those schools that were identified will continue to receive the supports and interventions consistent with that school's implementation plan for the 2020 2021 school year. So the 158, Senate Bill 158 does not impact this year because of the state waiver and that assurance that we had with the U.S. Department of Education. So those schools that were identified continue to be identified this coming year.
Okay. And we have another question about Senate Bill 158. How does the change of graduation requirements affect the requirement of the civics test?
So that's a good question. The civics test was also a legislative requirement from previous statute. So let us get back with you on that one and provide guidance, because the civics test is a district. The district has to create that civics test, and it's used toward graduation. So let us contact our partners over in the Office of Teaching and Learning and provide some additional guidance for you on that one.
Okay. We've had a couple more questions come in. This is about survey results. When can the districts expect some information or results from the survey? And I'm assuming that is the social studies.
Pam, that may be for the Quality of School Climate and Safety Survey, because we took that. So we took that operationally during that field test window. There were some schools that fell below the 95% participation rate for that survey, and we had asked those schools to investigate, do a little informal investigation, and let us know why they fell below the 95%. And that, I want to say, that investigation deadline is tomorrow. And so we've got a lot of feedback already for the participation below 95%. So we've got to take the next step on then putting that data together and getting back with our vendor, because Pearson is providing that data for us because it was taken in the TestNav system. So we've got a couple more steps to go through before those survey results are released to districts.
Okay. And we have a question here about testing tools. This person has teachers wondering if they can have access to the calculators and tools that are used during online testing. They would like to be able to integrate them into their classroom.
So that's a really good question. The Desmos calculator is used within TestNav. And the Desmos calculator is an online calculator. So absolutely, that resource is out there, and it can be utilized now for the remainder of the school year. And that is out there for everybody to use. And that was an issue last year when we were first implementing the TestNav, but Pearson has committed to using that Desmos calculator, and it is available online now. So teachers can utilize that. The other features within TestNav are things like highlighter and response, where they can remove the response eliminator and things of that nature. Those are just things that are available on any type of word processing application. So teachers are welcome to utilize those within whatever platform that they are using. And I think that even like Google Docs and things like of that nature utilizes some of those highlighter features and things like that.
And we have another question. Will KDE be providing a template for students to use technology enhanced tools? Will we be giving them anything more?
Yes, we are working right now on the development of the social studies practice items. So technology enhanced items are included in the social studies. So we will have those also available. As part of the survey that Helen talked about, we did get some feedback on the practice tests and in the comments. So we are looking and reviewing with Pearson those practice items as well. So we understand that there could be enhancements to those practice tests in this practice item, not practice tests, but practice items. We're looking closely at those. So look for more resources to come for those different pieces.
Okay. And we have a question about the social studies field test. Where can I find the link for that social studies field test participation?
It's on the bottom of that slide. So if you have the PowerPoint presentation and you, I think, Pam, they have to open it up in like presentation mode. Then when they do that, they can click that link at the bottom. So it's hyperlinked at the bottom of that slide. And Helen is moving toward that now. I want to say it's slide 17, Helen. Down there at the bottom, it should be like in purple, underlined, look like a hyperlink. So if you would click that link and complete that, we would really appreciate it.
And if you don't have it in presentation mode, if you just right click on it, you can either open the hyperlink or copy it and paste it into your browser. That also works. We have some more questions coming in about your Senate Bill 158. How will exiting current ATS-I status be impacted by Senate Bill 158?
So if we go back to the state waiver, right now, any school that is identified for comprehensive or targeted support and improvement or additional targeted support improvement for the 1920 school year, we will maintain that identification status for the 2020-21 school year. And all of those will continue to receive supports and intervention, and that is consistent with the school support and improvement plan in the 2021 school year. So Senate Bill 158 does not impact that waiver. So that waiver is in place right now. So the schools that are federally identified right now will continue that identification because we don't have the ability to test students this year. So we had to make the assurances to the U.S. Department of Education that those schools that were previously identified will continue to receive the supports that they have been promised.
And you never know who's listening. Rhonda Sims, our Associate Commissioner, has chimed in about our civics test question and to tell us that the Senate Bill 158 did not change the civics test requirement. So it is still required.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rhonda.
And as of this moment, that is all the questions that I have.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate your time. We will see you back here on June 11th. I'm going to turn it over to Pam, and she is going to honor a dear friend and colleague who worked in the Office of Assessment and Accountability in the Data Division for many years. And we want to remember him and all of the joy that he has brought to our lives and touched our lives for so long. So Pam, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Go ahead and move on. There we go. Francis J. Roberts, husband to Associate Commissioner Rhonda Sims, passed away on May 4th, 2020 after fighting a long and valiant battle. For over 18 years, Jay, a true warrior, always brought a warm smile and personality at the Kentucky Department of Education. He was a database analyst in the Office of Assessment and Accountability and was instrumental in the development of Kentucky's school report card before his retirement in 2013. As Jay very much loved poetry, this verse seems quite fitting. No Night Without You by Helen Steiner Rice. There is no night without a dawning, no winter without a spring. And beyond the dark horizon, our hearts will once more sing. For those who leave us for a while have only gone away out of a restless, careworn world into a brighter day. Jay will be in our hearts and memories forever. We'd like to thank you for being with us today. And please continue to send your questions in to dacinfo@education.ky.gov, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. We will see you again here on June 11th. Thanks again and have a great day.